Most people spend their entire lives waiting for something out there to change, a new job, a new partner, a lucky break, without realizing the world isn't the thing that needs to shift. They are. And deep down, they've felt this truth for years. That uncomfortable sense that no matter how hard they try, something inside them keeps recreating the same patterns over and over again. It's not fate, not bad luck, it's identity. Neville Goddard taught a truth so bold it almost sounds impossible. Your outer world is nothing but the expression of who you assume yourself to be, not who you hope to be, who you are being inside right now. This is why the same problems keep repeating, and it's why life feels stuck even when you're doing everything right. But it's also why your entire reality can transform the moment you do. And here's the paradox that changes everything. The world doesn't follow effort, struggle, force, or discipline. It follows state. Change your inner self-concept, even slightly, and the reality around you begins to reorganize with a precision that feels supernatural. People treat you differently. Opportunities appear, situations shift, not because the universe is rewarding you, but because it's mirroring you. Today, you're going to understand exactly how this works. And if you let these next ideas sink in, you won't try to fix the world again. You'll learn how to shift the only thing that ever mattered, the identity behind your assumptions. When that changes, nothing in your life can stay the same. He begins by saying that most people spend their entire lives trying to fix the outside world, as if rearranging the furniture could quiet the discomfort they carry inside. But nothing truly shifts, while the inner state stays the same. This is where the idea behind change yourself first, Neville Goddard, becomes more than a pretty phrase and turns into an actual method. Life isn't responding to what someone does. It's responding to who they are being. He explains that there is no promise more freeing than this one. If something needs to change, the transformation begins in the invisible, in that silent territory where no one else sees. The outer world doesn't bend because circumstances improve. It bends because identity does. That's the natural expression of the law of assumption, and the foundation of imagination creates reality. When someone holds on to the same old inner feeling, the world mirrors it faithfully. But when the state changes, reality must follow, like a shadow glued to the body. He reflects on how people often get frustrated because they think stepping into the wish-fulfilled state Neville Goddard is complicated. But the truth is the opposite. The state is simple, almost obvious, so simple that the rational mind tries to overthink it. Everyone has experienced a small version of it, waking up one day feeling different for no particular reason, and suddenly life seems lighter, conversations flow easier, and things fall into place. Nothing outside changed first. The shift was internal. He shares a common example. Someone stuck in financial stress believes money will bring them peace. But Neville would smile gently and say the peace must come first. Peace is the identity shift. Peace is the new inner self. Peace is the doorway that leads to abundance. Trying to earn peace through money is like trying to dry off before stepping out of the rain, backwards and exhausting. He goes on saying that this inner shift isn't about pretending or forcing positivity. It's more like changing the channel on an internal radio. If the station playing is full of lack and fear, the world around echoes that frequency. But when the internal dial moves toward calm confidence, the outer world naturally harmonizes. That's the real meaning behind feeling it real, Neville. Not forcing a feeling, but choosing the one that matches the life you want. He speaks softly about how people underestimate the power of identity. A person may take all the right actions, read all the right books, repeat all the affirmations, but if the identity behind those actions is still the same, nothing sticks. It's like pouring water into a cracked cup. The change must start with who they assume themselves to be. In the language of Neville, they must live in the end before the end arrives. He gives an analogy. Think of a thermostat. If the temperature drops, the thermostat doesn't panic or chase warmth outside. It simply returns to its internal setting, and the environment obeys. Identity works the same way. When someone internally sets themselves to calm, prosperous, capable, or loved, the external world adjusts. That's why Neville insisted that identity is the cause, not the effect. He shares another relatable moment. How often people say, "When my life improves, then I'll feel secure." But he gently flips that idea and says, real security comes from within first. It's the embodied knowing that you don't need the world to change before you do, and that realization alone already places you ahead of the old version of yourself, the one waiting for proof. He reminds the listener that creation is finished, explained in Neville's lectures. The version of you living your desired life already exists in consciousness. The shift happens when you choose that self over and over, quietly, without asking for permission from circumstance. You become the cause, not the effect. And when that becomes clear, the world stops feeling like an obstacle and starts feeling like a mirror. He closes this topic by saying the moment you shift inward, even slightly, life begins reorganizing itself in ways you didn't expect. New conversations, new emotions, new ideas appear. And if just one internal shift can do that, imagine what happens when you fully choose the identity aligned with what you desire, which leads naturally into what Neville revealed next. He starts by explaining that Neville's idea of yourself, pushed out Neville, is not a metaphor. It's a literal description of how consciousness shapes experience. The people you meet, the reactions you receive, the opportunities that arise, all of them echo your inner assumptions. Not your wishes, not your hopes, your assumptions. And that's why changing the inner dialogue is more powerful than changing the outer circumstances. He says that most people walk through life thinking circumstances are random, but Neville insisted that nothing is random. Everything you meet out there is a reflection of the state you're embodying in here. If someone lives assuming they're overlooked, the world becomes full of moments that confirm that story. If they assume they're chosen, the world adjusts accordingly. The mirror never lies, it only responds. He gives an analogy. Imagine walking into a room with tinted glasses. The room didn't choose the color, the glasses did. That's exactly how assumptions work. Your world doesn't become bright because the environment changed. It becomes bright because the lens did. This is the essence of law of assumption identity shift. Reality reorganizes itself around the identity you wear, the one you believe in most consistently. He continues by saying that people often underestimate just how quickly the world can reshape itself. A simple shift from "I'm always late" to "life flows smoothly for me" can change the way traffic moves, how others behave, and what opportunities unfold. It sounds mystical, but Neville would remind you that consciousness is the only creative power. Change the consciousness and the outer world, obedient by nature, rearranges itself. He shares an example of someone who used to assume that money was always running away from them. That assumption created situations where bills piled up, unexpected expenses appeared, and income seemed to vanish. When they shifted the assumption to "money comes to me in expected and unexpected ways," the world began to surprise them. Not because the world had changed first, but because they had. The new assumption created the new pattern. He mentions how even relationships follow this law. If a person assumes they're hard to love, they'll interpret even kindness as temporary. But the moment they internally accept, "I am loved, valued, and chosen," people start behaving differently around them. The world can only express what you assume to be true. That's why Neville insisted on choosing assumptions deliberately, rather than letting old patterns run the show. He reflects on how powerful it is to realize that you're never at the mercy of circumstances. You're at the mercy of your own assumptions. And assumptions can be changed the moment you decide to. That is the quiet power behind feeling is the secret. Feeling is how an assumption becomes embodied, rooted, alive inside you. Once it is embodied, the world must respond. He gently points out that some resist this idea because it means taking full responsibility for their inner world. But he smiles and says, responsibility is not blame, it's freedom. If you created it through an assumption, you can uncreate it through a new one. There is no permanence in the external world, only the inner state is stable, and that's wonderful news. He explains that the outer world isn't a battlefield, it's a canvas, and your assumptions are the brushstrokes. If you don't like what you're seeing, it's not the canvas you adjust, it's the painter. And the moment the painter changes their vision, the painting naturally follows. This is why Neville said the world is nothing more than the reflected image of your inner conversations. He ends by reaffirming that the moment you alter even one core assumption, life begins to reorganize itself. People speak to you differently, opportunities appear, obstacles dissolve, and this quiet shift sets the stage for what Neville reveals next. The mistake most people make when they try to change the outer world first. He begins by saying that one of the greatest misunderstandings in manifestation is the obsession with fixing the 3D world. People chase external solutions as if reality were a stubborn lock that needs brute force to open. But Neville warned that this struggle only deepens the belief that the 3D has authority. Every time someone tries to fight it, they're unknowingly declaring, "This world controls me," and the law responds accordingly. He explains that trying to change the outer world first is like arguing with your reflection in the mirror. You can push it, shout at it, negotiate with it. Nothing will change until you do. The reflection is not the source of the problem, it's the consequence. This is the essence of imagination creates reality. The 3D only mirrors the assumptions held within. When you try to fix the mirror instead of the face, you stay trapped in frustration. He gives an analogy that makes the listener laugh a little. Imagine seeing a spot on your forehead and wiping the mirror to clean it. It sounds silly, but that's exactly what people do when they try to fix circumstances without shifting identity. They keep polishing the mirror, taking action, stressing, hustling, while the spot remains on the true surface, the inner self. That's why Neville emphasized inner work. It's the only work that actually works. He mentions how in daily life, people feel powerless because they're reacting to effects instead of causes. If money seems tight, they chase opportunities with desperation. If relationships feel unstable, they beg for reassurance. If life feels chaotic, they attempt to control the chaos. But all of this is rearranging pieces on a chessboard when the real game is happening in consciousness. The 3D is only the scoreboard, not the player. He explains that letting the 3D world dictate your reactions is how old states stay alive. When someone panics because something didn't go their way, they are confirming the very identity they're trying to leave behind. They're feeding the state of lack, fear, or limitation. This is why Neville insisted repeatedly, do not condition the mind by the evidence of the senses. Evidence is old news, a snapshot of who you used to be. He shares a story about a friend who used to panic every time an unexpected bill arrived. She would immediately go into fix-it mode, cutting expenses, calling the bank, scrambling to control the situation. But every attempt only reinforced the belief that money was fragile and unpredictable. When she finally shifted her inner state to calm abundance, the bills stopped arriving as emergencies. They simply became part of a stable financial rhythm. He reflects on how effort in the outer realm is usually a symptom of inner misalignment. When someone is living from the wish-fulfilled state, Neville Goddard, actions feel natural, effortless, inspired, not forced. Effort becomes an expression, not a repair attempt. But when someone is trying to force change in the 3D, it reveals they are acting from the old identity. They're trying to drag the past into the future. He speaks about how this is why people feel drained after trying to fix everything around them. They're using physical effort to solve spiritual assumptions. It's like trying to patch a leaking roof while ignoring the hole in the ceiling. The root cause is always internal, always. Once the identity shift happens, the 3D aligns without resistance. This is the power behind law of assumption identity shift in practice. He adds that 3D is not the enemy, it's simply a servant. It reflects what you've been assuming, believing, and feeling. When someone tries to force it, they're treating the servant like the master. But when they turn within, they reclaim their place as the operant power. Then the world stops feeling heavy, and life begins to flow with an ease that feels almost magical, though Neville would say it's perfectly normal. He closes this topic by saying the moment you stop wrestling with the 3D, you finally create space to shift your inner state. When you stop trying to fix the mirror, you begin adjusting the original image, and that shift naturally prepares you for the next part of the journey, where real transformation begins. He begins by saying that transformation doesn't happen when life becomes easier. It happens when you stop letting appearances dictate who you are. Most people live in reaction mode, jumping every time the 3D world pokes them. But Neville taught that true power begins when you respond from identity instead of circumstance. When you choose your state first, the world eventually has no choice but to follow. He explains that appearances are nothing more than the echo of past assumptions. They look solid, loud, convincing, but they're old news. They're the delayed reflection of a state you're no longer required to keep. The moment you realize this, you stop fearing what you see. The 3D becomes a weather report of yesterday's beliefs, not a prophecy of tomorrow's possibilities. He shares how most people sabotage themselves by reacting emotionally to the 3D as if it were the cause. A bill arrives, and they panic. Someone doesn't text back, and they collapse into insecurity. Money slows down and they fall into fear. But every reaction reinforces the old identity. Neville called this being hypnotized by the senses. You break the hypnosis by refusing to let appearances dictate your inner state. He gives an analogy. Imagine watching a movie you've already seen. You wouldn't scream at the villain or panic in the tense scenes because you know how the story ends. When you live in the end, you feel the same way about your own life. You already know who you are becoming. You already know the identity you've assumed. And when something contradicts it, you simply say, "That's just the old script passing through." He explains that choosing the state doesn't require effort or pretending. It's as simple as selecting a seat in a theater. You choose where you will sit, where you will experience life from. Will it be from fear or certainty? From lack or abundance? From doubt or trust? This is the practical side of feeling it real, Neville. You pick the feeling that matches your desired identity and let it settle in as your new normal. He shares a relatable moment. Imagine someone wanting to embody wealth but panicking every time they look at their bank account. The panic is the old identity pulling them back. But if they pause and breathe into the feeling of being provided for, even for a few seconds, they begin stepping into the state of abundance. This shift is tiny at first, but it accumulates. Identity is built choice by choice, moment by moment. He often sees people waiting for signs that the shift is working, but Neville would say the sign is the shift itself. When you react differently, calmer than usual, more grounded than usual, less shaken than before, that's the indicator. You're no longer the version of yourself that the old world was reflecting. This is the quiet beginning of the law of assumption identity shift taking root. He points out that choosing your state isn't about ignoring the world. It's about not surrendering your power to it. You can acknowledge what's happening without letting it define you. A wise mentor once said, "You can observe the 3D without being owned by it." That's the moment you become the cause again, rather than the effect. He emphasizes that when you choose your state repeatedly, even softly, the 3D begins to lose its emotional grip. Old circumstances feel less threatening. Delays don't scare you. Setbacks don't define you. This is the moment the world becomes pliable, not because it changed, but because you did. And identity always leads reality. He closes this topic by saying that once you start choosing your state consciously, a new kind of momentum begins. You feel yourself becoming someone else internally, and this inner shift naturally prepares you for the next step, imagining the life you desire from the inside out. He begins by saying that people often overcomplicate imagination, thinking they need a long scene, perfect visuals, or deep meditation. But Neville insisted that a single, simple moment, one small slice of your desired life, is enough to shift everything. Imagination is not about complexity, it's about authenticity. When you imagine a moment that feels natural, your mind accepts it faster, and your state shifts effortlessly. He explains that this moment should be something that implies the wish fulfilled, yet feels familiar enough that you can relax into it. Maybe it's receiving a message saying congratulations, or placing your phone on a table inside a home you love, or feeling your shoulders relax because money is no longer a worry. These simple scenes carry the essence of the wish-fulfilled state Neville Goddard, without forcing anything. He emphasizes that feeling is the real ingredient. You don't need to see every detail perfectly. You only need to sense the atmosphere of being that version of yourself. The calm confidence, the ease, the quiet joy. This is the core of feeling it real, Neville. The moment you generate the feeling, the state becomes alive inside you, and identity begins to shift. He gives a practical analogy. Imagine pouring perfume into a room. The bottle is tiny, but the fragrance changes the entire atmosphere. Your imagined moment works the same way. It might last only a few seconds, but the emotional scent spreads through your consciousness, affecting your decisions, perceptions, and behaviors throughout the day. He shares a relatable example. Someone wanting financial freedom might imagine opening their mailbox and seeing a paid bill stamped "zero balance." Another person might imagine laughing on a couch because they finally feel safe. Neither scene is dramatic, but both imply the identity shift. What matters is that the scene feels like something your future self would naturally experience. He explains that this practice becomes even more powerful when done repeatedly, not with strain, but with familiarity. The more often you return to your chosen moment, the more the new identity settles in. At some point, the scene no longer feels like imagination. It feels like memory. And when the mind treats it as memory, the 3D world begins aligning with it automatically. He also points out that this isn't about escaping reality. It's about redesigning your internal blueprint. so the outer world has something new to reflect. Remembering that imagination creates reality makes this practice sacred. You're not daydreaming, you're selecting the version of yourself you will embody. He recalls a small personal story of someone who imagined a single moment each night, sitting at a kitchen island, sipping tea in a home they didn't yet have. That simple moment became so familiar that when the home finally manifested, it felt ordinary. Not because it wasn't special, but because the inner self was already living there long before it became physical. He adds that imagination is not a performance. There's no grade, no perfection needed. If the scene is simple and believable, it's powerful. If it evokes the feeling of "this is me now," it's enough. Your consciousness responds to sincerity, not intensity. He ends the topic saying that once you practice imagining a single moment consistently, your inner world starts shifting in ways you can feel, and that shift prepares you for the next part of the journey, recognizing the emotional signs that your transformation is already underway. He begins by explaining that one of the most overlooked signs of transformation is emotional texture. When the inner shift happens, the first evidence isn't in the outer world, it's in the way you feel. Neville always emphasized that feeling is the secret for a reason. It is the compass, the indicator, the confirmation that the identity shift is already in motion. He describes how relief often arrives quietly, not the dramatic kind where someone collapses from crying, but a soft loosening inside the chest, a breath that sinks deeper, a calm that doesn't need explanation. This relief shows that the old state has finally stopped fighting for survival and the new identity is settling in. It's the first sign of living from the wish-fulfilled state, Neville Goddard. He continues by saying gratitude is another powerful indicator, not the positive thinking kind, but a natural gratitude that arises without effort. It feels like an inner smile, a sense that life is unfolding in your favor even before physical results show up. This gratitude is not a tool you use, it's a byproduct of who you're becoming. It's what happens when the new you begins to breathe. He explains that calm confidence is perhaps the clearest signal of transformation. Not arrogance, not fake certainty, but a quiet knowing. It feels like standing on solid ground after years of walking on shifting sand. You stop obsessively checking for signs. You stop reacting to the 3D with fear. You stop questioning whether you're doing it right. This confidence is the embodiment of law of assumption identity shift. He offers a relatable example. Imagine someone who used to panic every time their bank account dipped. Once the shift happens, they may still notice the number, but it no longer shakes them. They simply know things are unfolding. That emotional neutrality is a massive sign of progress. The 3D didn't change yet, but they did, and the 3D must follow. He explains how sometimes the feeling shows up in daily routines, walking with a lighter step, making decisions more intuitively, speaking with more clarity. These small shifts reveal that the identity has already moved toward the desired state. People often miss these signs, thinking they're coincidences or mood changes, but Neville would say they are evidence of consciousness rearranging itself. He shares that emotions also become more stable. Someone who used to spiral easily might suddenly find themselves pausing before reacting, choosing calm instead of panic. This isn't discipline, it's identity. When the inner self changes, emotional patterns change along with it. It becomes easier to live in the end, because the end is already living inside you. He mentions that even moments of discomfort can be positive indicators. Sometimes the old state protests as it dissolves, creating temporary tension or doubt. But beneath that, there's a new baseline emerging, one rooted in stability rather than fear. If the person feels a strange mix of peace and unfamiliarity, that's a sign the inner self is stepping into a new territory. He notes that these emotional shifts often happen before any physical change. People might say, "Nothing has happened yet," but they already feel different. That difference is the manifestation. The world is just catching up. Remembering that creation is finished explained helps the person trust the process. He ends the topic reminding that feeling is not just part of the journey, it is the journey. When relief, gratitude, and calm confidence begin showing up naturally, it means the inner self has already crossed the threshold. And from here, the next step becomes natural, learning how to handle the echoes of the old state without losing your new identity. He begins by explaining that one of the most confusing moments in this journey is when old patterns suddenly reappear. A financial setback, an old insecurity, a familiar fear, a repeating situation, and the mind panics, thinking, "I must be doing something wrong." But Neville taught the opposite. These appearances are not setbacks, they are echoes, residual momentum from the previous state that is losing power. He says it's similar to when you change the direction of a moving car. The body still feels the pull of the previous movement for a moment, not because you're going wrong, but because you're shifting. Old patterns show up not to test you, punish you, or block you, but because they were set in motion by your old assumptions. They are simply finishing their cycle in the 3D world. He clarifies that fighting these patterns only gives them new life. Panicking, reacting, spiraling emotionally, all of that feeds the old identity. It reaffirms the very state you're trying to leave. The key is loyalty to the new identity, the one aligned with the wish-fulfilled state, Neville Goddard. Remaining stable, even when old echoes surface, is one of the clearest signs of maturity in the law of assumption. He uses an analogy. Imagine hearing the last notes of a song after you've already pressed stop. The music doesn't cut off instantly. It fades. The same happens with old patterns. The echo is not evidence that the new state failed. It's evidence that the old one is dying. When you don't react, the echo fades faster. He gives a relatable example. Someone decides to embody abundance and immediately feels more peaceful. But a few days later, an unexpected expense pops up. Old self, panic, new self, neutral awareness. The moment they choose neutrality instead of fear, they strengthen the new state. And often solutions appear faster because they didn't fall back into the identity of lack. He explains that emotional loyalty is more important than visual evidence. The old world might still show pieces of its former form, but internally the person is already different, and the world is obligated to catch up. Neville would say, persist in the assumption. That persistence is not effort, it's quiet, consistent identity. He adds that when people react calmly to old patterns, they often experience subtle pride, the healthy kind, a sense of, wow, I don't respond like I used to. That self-recognition is powerful because it reinforces the new inner structure. It shows that the law of assumption identity shift is already happening beneath the surface. He shares that even physical sensations can reflect the old state fading, restlessness, temporary doubt, or brief irritations. Not signs of failure, signs of transition. The body and mind recalibrate to the new identity. What used to trigger fear now triggers awareness. What used to cause spirals now causes reflection. This is evolution, not regression. He points out that the old world will sometimes try one last time to pull you back, not because it has power, but because you used to feed it. The moment you stop feeding it, it dissolves. Staying loyal to your new state, even if the 3D lags behind, is how you prove to yourself that you've truly shifted. He closes the topic by saying that once you understand echoes, you stop fearing them. You begin to see them for what they are, leftover vibrations from a self you no longer are. And when those echoes no longer intimidate you, something beautiful happens. The outer world begins showing the earliest signs of your new identity taking form. He begins by explaining that once the inner shift stabilizes, the world starts to subtly reorganize itself. Not always with fireworks or dramatic breakthroughs, but through quiet, unmistakable signs that something in your identity has changed. Neville taught that the outer world is yourself pushed out, so when you change, the behaviors, opportunities, and coincidences around you shift too, sometimes before you even notice. He says people often underestimate how quickly others begin responding to their new state. A person who felt invisible may suddenly be acknowledged more. Someone who assumed they were overlooked may start receiving compliments or unexpected attention. These moments aren't accidents. They are early reflections of the law of assumption identity shift, expressing itself through human behavior. He shares how synchronicities become more frequent, the right people appearing at the right time, the perfect idea showing up in a video or book, a message arriving exactly when you needed it. These moments are not random. They are the outer world rearranging itself to match your new inner configuration. When your state changes, your path changes. He gives an analogy. Imagine tuning into a different radio station. As soon as you switch frequencies, the music changes instantly. The world works the same way. When you embody the feeling of your desired identity, you tune into a new frequency, and life starts playing different music. These early changes are the new songs of your reality shifting. He explains that situations begin to align themselves with surprising ease. A problem that used to feel heavy suddenly resolves itself. Our conversation goes better than expected. Opportunities open that were previously closed. This is not luck. It's the natural expression of imagination creates reality. The world sees the identity you're embodying and adjusts accordingly. He shares an example. Someone embodying the wish-fulfilled state Neville Goddard regarding financial stability may suddenly receive a discount, a refund, or an unexpected offer. These small signs often show up before the big ones. They are like the early ripples before the wave arrives. Recognizing them builds faith, but more importantly, it builds identity. He notes that relationships also shift. People who used to irritate you might start treating you with more respect, or you may find yourself less reactive around them. This is because you're no longer approaching the world through the filter of your old assumptions. The change in your internal dialogue transforms the dynamic effortlessly. He points out that even your environment begins cooperating. Traffic flows differently, lines move faster, people hold doors for you, you get better seats, better timing, better outcomes. Not because the world suddenly became nicer, but because you're now aligned with a state that reflects ease rather than resistance. He mentions that one of the sweetest signs is when something that used to trigger anxiety now triggers neutrality. That shift alone is proof that the inner world is leading. When the world cannot pull you back into the old identity, it has no choice but to reflect the new one. This is the moment where feeling is the secret becomes deeply real. He ends the topic by saying, "These early signs are not the final manifestation, they are the invitation. They show that reality is dissolving the old structure and building the new one. And this sets the stage for the next step, trusting your inner shift without constantly checking the 3D for reassurance." He begins by saying that one of the greatest turning points in this journey is when you stop checking the 3D like someone refreshing a delivery tracker. At some point, the constant need for reassurance fades and a deeper trust takes over. Neville taught that the world is obligated to reflect your inner state, not sometimes, not occasionally, but inevitably. When you truly embody this, checking becomes unnecessary. He explains that deep embodiment feels like an inner exhale, a sense that you no longer need to convince yourself. You just know. It's not loud confidence, it's quiet certainty, like planting a seed and walking away because you trust the soil. This is what Neville meant by living in the end, not waiting for the world to change, but knowing it already has in consciousness. He says that checking the 3D is actually a subtle declaration of disbelief. Every time someone wonders, is it working? They reinforce the assumption that it isn't. Deep embodiment removes that question entirely. You no longer ask for signs because the inner shift itself is the sign. The feeling is the confirmation. This is the essence of feeling it real. Neville. He shares a relatable moment. Imagine someone who is manifesting financial freedom. Old identity, checking their bank balance 10 times a day. New identity, checking only when needed, without emotional charge. That emotional neutrality is not apathy. It's proof that the new state has taken root. The world must follow because identity always leads. He gives an analogy. Imagine a thermostat set to a stable temperature. It doesn't constantly check the weather to decide what it is. It holds its setting, and the environment adjusts. Deep embodiment works the same way. Your state becomes the thermostat, and the world adjusts to your assumptions. This is the power behind the law of assumption identity shift. He explains that deep embodiment also changes how you interpret challenges. What used to feel like setbacks now feel like temporary noise. You stop taking delays personally. You stop panicking at minor inconveniences. You stop assuming the worst. Instead, every part of you moves with the confidence of someone who knows the outcome is guaranteed through consciousness, not circumstance. He points out that people around you can sense when you've embodied a new identity. They respond to you differently because you're no longer projecting the old assumptions they used to reflect. Your energy, presence, tone, and expectations shift, and the world adjusts. This is what Neville meant by, "The world is yourself pushed out." He shares that deep embodiment also simplifies your desires. You no longer chase them. You no longer obsess over them. You no longer feel unworthy of them. You simply assume them as natural. Like brushing your teeth or opening a door, it becomes part of who you are. When the desire becomes identity rather than longing, manifestation becomes inevitable. He emphasizes that deep embodiment feels peaceful, not rushed. There's no more bargaining with the universe. No more, if this happens, then I'll believe. You already believe because belief is identity. Identity is the root. And once the root is planted, the outer world must reflect it, just as Neville taught in Creation is Finished explained. He ends the topic by saying, that this level of embodiment prepares you for the final realization. The world doesn't change through force, effort, or control. It changes because you changed. And from this understanding comes the final truth Neville taught so clearly. He begins by saying that Neville's most liberating truth is also the simplest. You don't need to push the world, convince anyone, force outcomes, or hustle your way into a new life. When you change your inner identity, the world reorganizes itself around you. It has no choice. The 3D is not the cause, it's the follower, and you are the one giving the command through your state. He explains that the world doesn't respond to effort, it responds to assumption. A person can work endlessly from fear and get nowhere, while another can shift their inner state and see results unfold naturally. This is why change yourself first. Neville Goddard became one of his most powerful teachings. When you shift who you believe you are, reality aligns like iron filings around a magnet. He describes how identity functions like a script. If someone identifies as a struggler, the world hands them scenes filled with obstacles. If they identify as chosen, the world provides opportunities that match that self-concept. The behavior of others, the timing of events, the flow of circumstances, all of it bends to the state you occupy. This is yourself pushed out Neville, operating behind the scenes. He shares a relatable example. Someone who decides they are worthy of abundance begins receiving unexpected kindness from others, smoother financial experiences, and better treatment in daily life. People think the world changed, but really they changed. The world simply reflected their new assumption. This is the nature of imagination, creates reality in action. He explains that identity is the true engine behind everything. When you embody the version of yourself who already has the life you desire, you no longer beg reality for proof. You no longer chase external validation. You no longer force outcomes. Instead, you move through life with quiet certainty. That certainty is the creative power, the hidden force that shapes your world. He gives an analogy. Imagine two actors on stage. One believes he's playing a background character. The other believes he's the lead. Their behavior reflects their self-concept long before the audience sees the play. Identity determines performance, not the other way around. And in life, identity determines circumstances. He shares that when you hold the state of the person you want to be, your decisions shift effortlessly. You speak differently, you walk differently, you think differently. Not because you're pretending, but because you're aligned with a new inner truth. And as Neville taught, the moment you feel yourself to be the person you desire to be, you become that person in consciousness. He points out that reality obeys identity the way a shadow obeys the body. If the body moves, the shadow must move. If the identity shifts, reality must shift. There is no negotiation, no resistance, no delay beyond the natural unfolding of the state. This is why Neville insisted, dare to assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. He reinforces that you don't need to manipulate circumstances, control people, or fight against anything. When your identity changes, the world becomes cooperative. Situations resolve themselves. Opportunities find you. Answers appear. This is the effortless nature of creation, the heart of law of assumption identity shift. He ends the final topic by saying that once you truly understand this, life stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like a dance. You lead. Reality follows. And now that every piece of the journey has been revealed, the next step is to bring all of this into the introduction of your video, where the transformation begins for the viewer. As you reach this moment, take a quiet breath and notice something. The version of you who began watching this video is not the same one sitting here now. Something inside has shifted, even slightly, and that shift is the only thing the world needs in order to change. Neville always said that transformation is an inside job, and now you've seen why. Identity leads, reality follows. So here's the question only you can answer. Who are you choosing to be when this video ends? The old you waiting for life to improve? Or the new you, the one who knows that assuming a new state is the fastest path to a new reality? Let this be the moment you stop reacting to the world and start creating from within. Practice the feeling of who you want to be. Choose your state on purpose. Trust the inner shift more than the outer noise. And watch what happens when life finally mirrors the identity you've decided to embody. If this message stirred something in you, then don't let the transformation stop here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep learning how to reshape your reality from the inside out. Your new world begins the moment you assume it.